Okay, we are live. Welcome to Garden Lake Bible Church. We are in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Please turn there. So where we are at with 2 Corinthians, we finished Paul kind of giving us a rundown on what giving is, what it should mean to us, what generosity is, what it should mean to us. And now for the next few chapters between 10 and 13, we have Paul essentially defending his apostolic ministry. And he's not doing this because he's vain, okay? He's not doing this because he's insecure or anything like that, but rather kind of going back to 1 Corinthians where he was dealing with people that were attacking him based on, his prowess up at the pulpit. They had basically said Apollos is a better speaker, Peter is a better speaker, or even a better leader in some cases. And they're still kind of at it at this point. They're still basically trying to undermine the gospel that Paul is trying to share. And Paul knows that this is obviously a very important thing. He needs to defend the faith because it is God-given. And the truth is, he is trying to communicate a vital importance that Jesus is light. And so obviously, this is about as most important as you could get here. Paul knows that these are not things that can be taken lightly. He knows that this message that he's giving is literally life and death. And we can't either. We can never afford to water down, compromise, manipulate, update, any of these words in here, because again, they're given from God. We don't have that kind of authority. And ultimately, what it comes down to, and what Paul realizes, that souls are at risk here. Paul says in Galatians 1:8, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel contrary to the one we preach, be under a curse. So Paul jealously guards the ministry that he's given. Yeah, the power went out in here. No, totally fine. But anyway, Paul refused to compromise on the message. And because of that, basically what he's saying to these guys is, you guys are dangerous. You're destructive, and he needs to speak against that. So that's what we're going to get here. Is he going to speak against it? Yes, but he's going to do it in love. He's going to do it in a tough kind of love. So it is going to sound a little bit condemning, absolutely, and rightly so. But remember that he's doing all this in love. He's trying to correct them, teach them, much like a parent. So verses 1 and 2, chapter 10. Now by the mildness, say that correctly. Now by the mildness and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. I, Paul, who am humble when face to face with you, but bold when away. I beg you that when I come, I may not need to be as bold as I expect towards those who presume that we live according to the flesh. So Paul here, he's reminding them that, again, this letter is going to be very strict in a lot of ways, very condemning in a lot of ways. And obviously it includes a lot of correction, but again, he's doing all this for a very important reason. He points out that the tone of his letter is probably a little bit different than the Paul that they've experienced in person. All right? And because of that, the people, and even we, as we read this, you might be inclined to think that Paul's writings are almost like the internet tough guy, that is out there today, where you meet him on the internet and he has a lot of things to say, and they're mean, they're cruel generally. He'll say whatever's in his head because he has the anonymity of a computer, right? He's behind a computer screen. And again, the people will, like that, they'll be aggressive, they'll generally be cruel. But I don't think that's what's happening with Paul here, okay? He's not, saying what he's saying because of anonymity or anything. Again, he's even saying, like, I'm going to be coming to you. I'm going to be face-to-face with you soon. Keep that in mind as you're reading what I'm writing here. And Paul, in no way, shape, or form, was ever afraid of confrontations. I mean, his history is all confrontation. He hunted the Christians to the point that he was essentially, feared. I mean, he was a poster child for cruelty. He, faced off against Elymas, the sorcerer. He faced off against Jews, the Jews in Iconium. He even at one point confronted Peter because Peter was being a little hypocritical in the way that he was treating the Gentile Christians. So Paul, not a guy that's really worried about confrontations in any way. So that's not it. It's not that. He's heavy-handed in this letter because the situation requires it. All right? So when you're a parent, there are times that your children will do things wrong that should elicit a certain kind of response for you. And then there's other times where it's got to be a different response, and it can be the same thing. A child that has a glass on the edge of their table, and you said to Leia 30 times, move that thing off the edge of the table, it's going to fall. And you've seen her kind of doing one of these, and, she's just kind of moving her. It falls over the edge. Now, is the response to that, an immediate anger and, throwing, her down the wall kind of thing? No, she made a mistake. Obviously it was a mistake she shouldn't have made, but it was still just a mistake. I would not react the same way to where she grabbed that glass and smashed it on the ground in defiance. That would take a different kind of response, obviously. So I think that's what Paul is doing here. He's heavy-handed in his corrections because there have been some serious mishandling of church disciplines, okay? Either being too harsh or too lenient, it doesn't matter actually, but, he goes through certain things that are really, really important, like, marrying unevenly yoked spouses. That is dangerous. That is something that can really hurt you down the road. Accepting teachers who preach a false Jesus, which, we learned about, or we're going to learn about, in 2 Corinthians 11, that can be spiritually fatal for everyone within the congregation. So, again, I think he's being a little bit on the rough side here because he feels that he needs to be. Paul was different when he taught them in person. If you remember, the first time he was there to plant the church. So that's probably a different Paul than what you're dealing with now because he wasn't talking to Christians at the time. And the second time, he specifically mentions that time that him being in the second time around, that was just as painful for him as it was for the people that he was speaking to. So again, when I see Paul coming so heavy-handed in these words here in the scripture, that's almost like a parent saying, don't make me come down there, getting angry basically over what he's hearing. So Paul is saying in these verses that though he has to be bold with them, he doesn't have a choice, he is expecting some opposition, but he's also saying he's really hoping that his fears will be unfounded. Now, we know that there is a vocal group that doesn't like him much, like I said in the beginning, and he's hoping to help them understand that he's not just a dog that's going to bark menacingly behind a fence. Again, speaking from far away here as he's writing this, he's not just a dog that barks from a fence and then when you open the gate, tucks his tail and runs. Okay, that's not Paul's personality. Like a parent, again, he hopes everything's going to go well, but he's prepared if things don't. Now, in verse 2, it's kind of important that we have to take a look here and then see what's being said. Paul's speaking about people within the church who are arguing against Paul, judging him according to the flesh. And we'll read it again. I beg you that when I come, I may not... Oh, I'm sorry, not that verse. Verse 3. Did I not read verse 3 yet? Oh, boy. I'll read verse 3. For though we live in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. Now, again, this gets really deep into the next part, and we do need to understand what he's talking about here, because a lot of times when we hear Paul talking about, war according to the flesh, it's a slightly different idea than what he's talking about here. He usually means, spiritual rebellion or, straight up sin. But what he means here is he's saying that, you probably think we care about worldly things like, strength, your ability to speak, being impressive when you stand there. But you're mistaken. Those aren't things that we worry about. That's what he's talking about when he's saying that you think we live according to the flesh. What these people are doing is they're coming from a very worldly perspective when they're judging Paul or, basically going along with what he's saying. They're taking a look at what's being said and not really listening to the message so much, but more looking at the message giver and the method with which he's giving it. They're coming from a worldly idea, and basically where physical things are impressive or important to them. And what Paul is trying to say is those physical things are not important in any way, shape, or form. Verse 3 here. For though we live in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not the weapons of this world. Instead, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We tear down arguments and every presumption set up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience as soon as your obedience is complete. So Paul's argument to these people saying, listen, you're not impressive enough, then basically, again, judging according to the flesh, Paul's saying, we live in the flesh, we can't help that, but I don't fight with fleshly weapons, is what he's saying. His ministry methods were not human, okay? They aren't manipulative. They're not political. They're not power-driven. They're not charismatic or anything like that. Paul's weaknesses are what God is consistently using throughout his ministry. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Again, he's spirit-driven in his ministry. He isn't self-promoting. He isn't intimidating. For Paul, it's all about truth, the gospel of Jesus, and conforming to Jesus. And that's why he says, my weapons are designed, they're not designed like the weapons of the world, or they are not like the weapons of the world. The things of God are not like the things of the world, all right? God's divine weapons tear down false ideas. They tear down false religions. They humble the proud, and they bring us into obedience with him. And what are the spiritual weapons? Everybody knows what the spiritual weapon, the one that Paul mentions, right? Ephesians 6. Let's go there and look at it real quick. Verse 13, Ephesians 6:13. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you will be able to stand your ground, and having done everything to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of a plate of righteousness arrayed, and with your feet fitted with the readiness of the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation, and here it goes, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And just for fun, listen to this in the next verse. Pray in the Spirit at all times, with every kind of prayer and petition. To this end, stay alert with all perseverance in your prayers for all the saints. So we had one offensive weapon there, right? The sword. That's the one weapon that's mentioned. And then immediately, the very next verse, Paul's admonishing all of us, pray in the Spirit at all times. So the way I see it, we have two weapons, the Spirit, obviously, and prayer. And what Paul, again, is saying is, you guys think you judge in a very fleshly manner. And you look at me and you say, okay, he's unimpressive, but my ministry is not powered by those things that you think are important. It is powered by God. And the weapons that God provides will destroy all of your arguments and tear down your false religions. That's essentially what he's saying here. Verse 7. You are looking at outward appearances. If anyone is confident that he belongs to Christ, he should remind himself that we belong to Christ just as much as he does. For even if I boast somewhat excessively about the authority the Lord gave us for building you up rather than tearing you down, I will not be ashamed. This set of verses is something that we should probably all pay pretty close attention to. Paul's admonishing these guys for, again, taking his outward appearance and judging based on that. Now, Paul traditionally, not scripturally, but traditionally, he was not an impressive guy to look at. He was short, he was bald, he was bow-legged, he had a hooked nose, and evidently a constant oozing coming out of his eyes because of some kind of disease. He was also evidently not a great speaker, and traditionally, again, don't say this scripturally, but traditionally he had a squeaky voice. So all of these things you're thinking about, short, bald, bow-legged, hook-nosed guy with stuff oozing out of his eyes, not a good speaker and a squeaky voice. Is that who you want up in your pulpit? It's got to think about that for a minute, right? I mean, could he get a little annoying after a period of time listening to the squeaky voice? I don't know. Would you want to constantly see oozing out of his eyes and he goes to shake your hands? I don't know. But the whole point that is being said here, that Paul is saying, is you can't pay attention to those things because they're not the important part. It's the message that he's giving that are the important part here. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. See, again, when Paul spoke, they saw him and not God. They heard the words, but they missed the message. And Paul's reminding them, though, that they should view themselves as similar to him. Okay, not, they don't view themselves with pride in their abilities or view themselves in pride in their stature or anything like that, but rather view themselves as sinners saved by grace, just like everyone else is, every other believer. In fact, that goes for all of us too. No believer in Jesus is greater than any other believer, or has, we'll just leave it there. We are all equal heirs to the children, or equal heirs as children of God, okay? And we're only able to call ourselves that because of what Jesus did. Again, it has nothing to do with us in any way, shape, or form that we've done, how we're born, nothing. None of us here is here because of their own merit. None of us here is here because of their own accomplishment. No Christian in this room stands above or below anybody else. Jeremiah 9:23 and 24 said, this is what the Lord says, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, nor the strong man in his strength, nor the wealthy man in his riches, but let him who boasts boast in this, and listen carefully, that he understands and knows me. Wow. That I am the Lord who exercises loving devotion, justice, and righteousness on the earth, for I delight in these things. If you have to boast in something, boast in the Lord. Boast that you have a relationship with the creator of the universe. What could be more important than that, right? What could be more important than having a relationship with God, and not just wondering, could there be a higher power out there? What's going to happen to me when I die? All of those things that come along with it, of the real knowing of it. That kind of knowledge, it should power you, right? I mean, it should power your words. It should power your deeds. It should be your essence, And not for nothing, but imagine, we're talking about only bragging about, being in the Lord. How about when your friend down the street says, hey, I got a new car, and you go over to see the car and you say, oh, that's really nice, a new car. Let me tell you about my Father and King. You might get a little bit of a different reaction from some of the people around on the street, but this is what he tells us to boast in. If you're going to boast in something, boast that you know the Lord. Verses 9 through 14. I do not want to seem to be trying to frighten you by my letters. For some say his letters are weighty and forceful, but his physical presence is unimpressive, and his speaking is of no account. Such people should consider that what we are in our letters when absent, we will be in our actions when present. Verse 12, we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who condemn themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they show their ignorance. We, however, will not boast beyond our limits, but only within the field of influence that God has assigned to us, a field that reaches even to you. We are not overstepping our bounds as if we had not come to you. Indeed, we are the first to reach you with the gospel of Christ. So Paul starts out this little section by saying, listen, I'm not trying to scare you guys straight or anything along those lines. But you have to understand that the gospel, that we believe in our core, we don't just talk the talk. We walk the walk. And you can believe that we're going to be walking into your church very, very soon, convicted of this message that I'm giving to you now, and some are going to take accountability. Paul is very serious about this. Now he goes on in verse 12 and he compares his ministry or anybody that compares their ministry, if I'm saying this right, they're comparing their earthly ministry to other earthly ministries. That's what he's trying to say. Because what happens when a person, group, company, anything along those lines, when it wants to measure itself, what does it do? It looks to other people that look similar, or other groups that look similar, or other companies that look similar. It looks around and it says, oh, this is, this guy is about the same size as me, or this guy is about, the same age as me, and he's doing this over here. Oh, I'm doing better than him, and that's basically what's happened is we're comparing ourselves. This is what the world does. And unfortunately, we do as well a lot of times. We'll see other people out there, again, doing better or worse than us. That guy over there, he's cursing, he's drinking, he's being rude to others. Well, I'm not that bad, so I must be okay, kind of thing. No, Paul says, no, that's not how you determine how well you're doing. That's not how you measure yourself. When we're responsible, especially when we're responsible for a godly ministry, and we're living out our salvation, we're utilizing our gifts, we should not be playing a competitive game, okay? We should not be comparing ourselves to others, and we certainly shouldn't be trying to match or best them based on, again, worldly standards. I've heard people get down in our little church before, because we don't have a huge stage, we don't have lights, we don't have smoke, we don't have, the LED the size of the wall, we don't have a giant worship band, we don't have snacks at the front door, but we love the Lord. We love the Lord with all our hearts, and our goal every Sunday is to create a godly and loving environment that reaches out to people who need it and grows the people who need it. That's what we do. We all have functions within the body of a church. A mega church won't have maybe such a personalized setting. Maybe they wouldn't have the same love for each other that we have. It's almost like family, for some of us here. But they might be better at grabbing someone's attention who really needs it, and really needs that worship experience. They might be better at that. We all have a place within the body. We all have functions. Mega church, all the way down to us. We can't compare ourselves, by looking at their attendance and then versus ours. We can't compare ourselves by looking at their LED screen versus ours. That's what Paul is saying we can't do. An ear can't say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body. That's 1 Corinthians 12. These other folks that consider themselves above Paul here only think this because they're comparing themselves to one another. Again, not to the ministry, not to God, rather, not to the message that Paul's giving. It's like when a group of kids go to race on a playground, and one kid wins and he declares himself the fastest runner in the world. He's the champion of all. That's not true. You didn't run against Usain Bolt. You didn't train or anything like that. But that's what these guys are doing. They are measuring themselves by themselves, not by God's standards. And that's the only standard that really matters. Verse 15, neither do we boast beyond our limits in the labors of others, but we hope that as your faith increases, our area of influence among you will greatly increase as well, so that we can preach the gospel in the regions beyond you. Then we will not be boasting in the work already done in another man's territory. Verse 17, rather let him who boast in the Lord, for it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. So Paul is saying here that while there are some accomplishments of the Corinthian church, and I'm sure Paul is proud of them to a degree, he doesn't boast in what they've accomplished. He doesn't go around telling other people, look what they're doing based on what I instructed them on. But rather, as a spiritual father in a way, he's hoping that there's going to be good news coming out of Corinth, that their faith is increasing, that they're growing in the Lord, that God is using them to go further and further, push that message further and further out. Most churches today will point to their accomplishments if they need a proof of legitimacy. Again, they'll say, we had 500 people in the pews this morning. Our church donated the most money to missionaries. But Paul is saying you shouldn't be boasting in your accomplishments, okay? If you want to brag, again, brag about something that really matters, something that trumps everything else. Say, I know the Lord. Say, God called me. God knows me. I am loved. And for some reason, he washed me, imputed his righteousness on me, and made me his heir and calls me his son. There is no greater thing to brag about in creation. We leave all the bragging and comparing and all that stuff to the folks who are stumbling in their faith into the world, and we just rest on the Lord's commendation for us. His opinion of us is the only one that really matters. He loves us perfectly and unconditionally. Pastor Ron, can you pray us out, please?